We are continuing with the theme of national trauma. As I mentioned in the previous episode, if you missed, do check it out. Links in the description and at the corner of the screen. South Korea in the mid-1990s was plagued with various accidents and disasters. In the span of mere 2 years, a train derailed, plane crushed, boat sank, bridge fell, and the ground erupted with a gas explosion. They were all the symptoms of rapid economic growth for the price of neglecting proper regulations and transparent system. Oh, but what more and worse could happen on top of what had happened already? By 1990s, economy was booming in Korea. For the first time since its independence, the country's middle class had disposable income, and now they wanted a better quality in life. Sampoong Department Store, opened in 1989, read the demand precisely and marketed itself as the purveyor of luxury goods. Long before the international luxury brands opening their flagship stores in South Korea, department stores were the only place where Koreans could get access to imported luxuries, and Sampoong was the front runner. And at 3 minutes before 6 p.m., June 29th, 1995, the whole store section of the building collapsed in a matter of 20 seconds, with thousands of its staffs and clients still inside. It was such an unlikely event, less than 6-year-old brand-new luxury store building collapsing. There were all sorts of speculations as for what might have caused it, from gas explosion to terror attack by North Korea. But the true cause was even more surrealistic than any such speculation. From the inception to the moment of collapse, this shiny new department store was a complete catalogue of profit-driven greed and corruption. The plot of the store was meant to be allowed only for a residential building, but they bribed the authority to allow more lucrative commercial building. The construction was, at best, shoddy. The pillars were meant to be 32-inch diameter on the paper, but in truth they were reduced to 23 inches, and to make the matters worse, the rebars in the pillars were not properly latched to the floor that they were supposed to support. Almost to the completion of the building, the owner of Sampoong changed his mind to open a department store instead of a simpler commercial building servicing the residents of the apartment complex nearby. For the new plan, they added a whole new 4th floor without reinforcing the structure. Actually, they actively undermined it further to fit the more open space plan required for a modern department store. A quarter of the central pillar were cut to fit the escalators, and some pillars were removed altogether. After the disaster, many experts commented it was a miracle that the building endured as long as 5 years. The building was never designed to house a mega store from the beginning, and it should never have passed a safety inspection. But bribes and strategic strings pulled, let it slip. Towards the day of disaster, there were plenty of signs of imminent risk of collapse, but the owner refused closing the store for the emergency reinforcement, citing the financial loss. In the end, apart from the restaurants on the 4th floor where the structural failure were too obvious to ignore, most of the department store was opened for the business as usual till the last minute. The technical side of the disaster is well explained in many videos, including a National Geographic documentary. If you are interested, I recommend you to check them out. Links are in the description. Having already covered so many disasters in the recent years, the medias moved quickly this time, but the authority was not. Nobody was ready for a disaster of this scale, and there were no set protocol, no integrated control tower, no adequate equipment. Despite heroic efforts of the rescue workers and volunteers, the initial golden hours were wasted. People's initial shock quickly turned to anger when the true nature of the collapse was revealed. For grueling weeks, people had to watch helplessly the unfolding news day by day. There were occasional moments of hope when a survivor was pulled out of mangled concrete and twisted rebars, but most of times the death count rose seemingly endlessly. After almost 3 weeks of rescue efforts, the final count was 502 dead, 6 missing, and 937 injured. The whole nation fell under a sort of PTSD. All the previous disasters for the past years, from the plane crash to failed bridge, pointed the systematic failure of the nation, but the collapse of Sampoong was on a whole different level. Not only was the single biggest disaster in the peacetime, but the significance that the luxury department store, which symbolized the country's recent economic growth and rising standard of life, had collapsed by its own corruption and greed, was too clear a writing on the wall, impossible to miss even for the most naive and apolitical person. As I mentioned in the last episode, it's a human instinct to turn an event too terrible to face into a story. It is then only natural there are plenty of stories regarding the collapse of Sampoong floating around. I can see most of them are more of made-up stories or urban myth, but each of them suggests various aspects of the disaster, from the human tragedy and terror to frailty of our existence, to a mockery to the society that failed to properly remember the victims of the disaster. Here are 8 stories about the collapse of Sampoong Department Store. As always, handpicked, translated, and narrated by your host, Anthony. A mother took her 4-year-old son on a shopping to a department store. During the shopping, the boy looked around, grew restless, and started crying uncontrollably, which was very unusual as he was usually good behaving. The mother consoled him, bribed him with a promise of chocolate afterwards, but all in vain. All he continued saying between his sobs were, "Let's go, Mom, let's go." In the end, she gave up shopping, got out, and took a taxi back home. She then asked, now finally calming down, son, "Why were you crying so much today?" The son replied, "There, Mom, in the shop, these black people were hanging on everybody's neck. It was on your neck too." That was the day Sampoong Department Store collapsed. An acquaintance of mine used to live in the flat near Sampoong Department Store. Her neighbor was an old lady, not quite a shaman, but had strong spiritual sensitivity. Friendly and bubbly by nature, she kept a good relationship with the old neighbor too. One morning, the old lady knocked on her door and abruptly asked, "Do you have any business to visit the department store today?" She actually was to meet her friend there in the afternoon. The neighbor's face changed color and told her in a low voice, "Today is not the day. Never, ever go there today." She was confused, but she had already seen several times firsthand how her neighbor's advices and predictions coming true, and changed the appointment to a different location. And Sampoong collapsed that evening. Later she asked the old lady what had made her to warn her. She said, "I looked out of the balcony and saw the top of the department store all black. There were dozens and dozens of grim reapers, smiling ear to ear and dancing madly up and down like a shaman during a ritual. They must have been happy to know so many souls were due." In that fateful evening, a woman came shopping at Sampoong Department Store. After buying other things, she went down to the basement to the popular bakery in the food section. She picked all she wanted and opened a wallet to pay, but all her cash was gone. Even her credit cards were missing. They were all there when she paid for her clothes just a few minutes ago. She was embarrassed and panicked too, as they might very well have been stolen. So apologized to the cashier and hurried out of the store, thinking to file a report to the police right away. And then, from behind her back came thunderous noise, vibration akin to an earthquake, followed by shock waves of black dust. She fell on the ground. But what was truly shocking was that the building that was standing there just a moment ago was now gone. Thankfully, she had already walked far away enough to avoid big injuries and managed to come back home. Suddenly, she had a hunch. She took out her wallet and opened it up. Her cash and cards that had been missing were all there again. Had she been able to pay at the bakery and carried on shopping other things, she would have been under the rubbles by then. A young woman had found a job as the service staff at Sampoong Department Store. It was a hard work, but she was happy enough to work in one of the most luxurious stores in the country. One night she had a dream in which her late grandfather appeared and sternly told her to quit her job. Ominous, but of course she couldn't quit her new job just because of a dream. One evening, she helped an old gentleman customer to select something. But as soon as they reached the cashier, the customer started running off without paying. The woman chased him through the store. He was incredibly fast for a man of his age. But she was determined and carried on following him out of the store when a great noise shook the ground behind her. Yes, the department store collapsed. In 1995, I was a university student. It wasn't a university and major I had originally wanted, but just a second best choice to fit my poor SAT result. So I wasn't really very enthusiastic about attending lectures. Fortunately, I found a particularly big, broad fellow student, and I strategically took the seat behind him. The guy's sheer mass was perfect to hide away from the professor's view. The term finished on June 27th. 2 days later, Sampoong Department Store collapsed. Came September, I went back to university for the new term. I noticed the big guy was missing. It would have meant nothing to me if he were not my shield. So I said to other colleague, "I don't see the big guy." He looked at me surprised and said, "Didn't you know? He's dead." During the summer vacation, the big guy found a part-time work at Sampoong Department Store. On that fateful day, he happened to oversleep and decided just skip the day. And that evening, he heard the news that his entire workplace had been collapsed into rubbles and dusts. He was so shocked and called up his mates that he must have some drink that night. So a few guys gathered up and opened bottles. The initial shock as they got drunk became a tentative self-congratulations. "What a luck I overslept, huh? You lucky bastard! These drinks are new, right?" etc. Then the big guy got up saying he needed to leak, but curiously walked towards the balcony instead of toilet. Next moment, his friend saw his feet floating up and him falling off over the balcony. The bar was just on the first floor, but he fell straight on his head to the hard concrete ground, and he didn't survive. When the horror film The Destiny opened, I, who had never felt queasy about any other gore horror films, could not finish it, for the memory of the incident 20 years ago. Near the collapsed Sampoong Department Store is Seocho Metro Station. The rumor goes, occasionally past midnight, a woman would appear in the station holding a 4 or 5-year-old looking boy's hand. Her hair is permed in the early 90s style. Her dress and makeup would all look as if she stepped out from a couple of decades ago. And in her other hand is a shopping bag with a Sampoong logo. I live in the flat that was built on the spot where the collapsed department store used to be. I have a cute, sweet Maltese dog. She had never done this before we moved in here, but in the new flat, she would occasionally bark into the air, or sometimes to the empty sofa. I scold her to stop or even hold her to distract, but nothing seems to work. I'm already a bit creeped that I'm living on the spot of the disaster, and my dog's strange behavior only makes it worse. Why is she doing that? A student I give a private lesson to told me this story. She used to live in Sampoong apartment, obviously not far from the collapsed department store. Next to what was Sampoong Department Store was a large barbecue restaurant, and in between was a narrow and long passage with no side ways. Once you step in, you had just one option of carrying on till the end of the passage. One evening, my student's sister took the passage on her way back home. She would have usually avoided this claustrophobic way, but it was getting late and she was tired enough to ignore it for once. About midway into the passage, she saw a man running from the opposite side. He was wearing a white dress shirt, unbuttoned down to his chest, with blood stains dotted on it. He was running towards in an impossible speed. She instinctively sensed it wasn't a human. She froze on the spot and just clenched her eyes shut. Swoosh! The man just passed through her. She couldn't dare to look back at him and hurried her shaky steps forward. Alas, before she could reach the end of the passage, she saw that man running, passing through her 8 times, time after time. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for your listening. I think any country goes through the phase when the consequence of unregulated pursuit of profit hit back hard, usually after a period of economic and industrial expansion. Mid-1990s was such a time for South Korea. If the country is a bit safer place now, it owes to all the terrible disasters from the time. I hope you are not finding the National Trauma series too depressing, because I'm planning one more episode under the theme next week. If you haven't yet, please give my video a like, leave comments, share it on other social medias, and consider subscribing to my channel. Every single like, comment, and subscription means a lot for me and my little channel. Thank you. Until the next, stay safe and take care.